Hello everyone, and welcome to the second GovernMax live stream. So I hope everyone is enjoying their Friday and has had a nice February. So since it is the end of the month, we are going to go through all of the government actions that occurred this month. So some of the things that we saw this month, just some highlights: further confirmation of Biden's cabinet picks, the Trump impeachment trial, a lot of different government, executive actions, and then quite a few Supreme Court cases. So that's what we're going to go through today. All right, just want to make sure everything is running smoothly. It looks like it. Yeah, okay. All right. So, we start with the legislative branch. And, yeah, as I said, you've got the Senate was doing a lot, and the House did a little bit, but there hasn't been much legislation that has come out this month. In fact, there has been no legislation that has come out this month. There have been House resolutions and, Senate resolutions as well, but no actual public laws to be signed by the president have come out. All right. So we begin with one of the House resolutions, House Resolution 72, which was a House resolution that removed Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, from all of her committee assignments. And this came after statements made online. I do not know the full scope of these statements. I didn't really look into that. That, of course, is not what I really focus on here. I just focus on the government action. So this step was made, this action was taken by the House in response to these online statements. So this is pretty short here. You have, whereas Clause 1 of Rule 23 of the Rules of the House of Representatives provides, a member, delegate, resident commissioner, officer, or employee of the House shall behave at all times in a manner that shall reflect creditably on the House. So this, I imagine, is part of the new House of Representatives rules. And again, if you check back with last month, that was House Resolution 8, where the House established its own rules. However, most of the rules that the House established had already been established. The first thing they did, of course, was adopt the rules of the 116th Congress, and then they edited them a little bit. So I imagine this clause has been in there for a while, just statistically speaking. So then continued, whereas Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene should be removed from her committee assignments in light of conduct she has exhibited. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the following named member and is hereby removed from the following standing committees of the House of Representatives: Committee on the Budget and Committee on Education and Labor. So those were some of this Congresswoman's committee assignments. So yeah, this, the role of committees in Congress, this isn't totally removing a Congresswoman. The House does have the capability to do that. They can actually expel members if they want to, and that involves just not seating them at all. That was done quite a lot during the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. But that would be more extreme than what's happened here. In that sort of situation, a representative wouldn't even be able to vote on the passage of bills. They wouldn't even be a representative. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is still a Congresswoman. She just doesn't get any committee assignments, is essentially what happens. And a committee, so she can still vote on the passage of a bill. However, the committee process is fairly important. It sort of shapes a bill. When after a bill is introduced, there's amendments to be made, clauses to be removed. That sort of process, that privilege has essentially been removed from Representative Green because of her conduct, which is how the House has decided to, apply its rules, saying that representatives need to behave in a proper manner for politicians. Whether you agree with that or not, that's just what they've decided. So that is what occurred on February 4th. All right, next. Next, we've got Senate Concurrent Resolution 5. So this resolution was passed by the House as well, and this is all about the federal budget for 2021, but then also sort of pre-planning for the budgets through 2030. And this, of course, does not need to be signed by the president because the Constitution gives the Congress the sole power to regulate the budget. It's the power of the purse. So they're able to do this just through resolution on their own. And I think this actually passed the House as well. There were two resolutions. There was a House concurrent resolution that was going to be passed by the Senate, but then the Senate passed its own Senate concurrent resolution that went back to the House. It's, bounces back and forth, but this is what ultimately passed. So this concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2021. So Congress declares that this resolution is the concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2021, and that this resolution sets forth the appropriate budgetary levels for fiscal years 2022 and 2030, through 2030, sorry. And so then you've got a table of contents. This is a very, very long bill, obviously, because it covers the budget of the entire government for many years to come. But so more analysis is needed in terms of what goes on here, but this budget, it says it recommends levels, and this is from the Congress's website about it. It also recommends levels and amounts for Social Security and Postal Service discretionary administrative expenses for the purpose of budget enforcement in the Senate. Let's see. Yeah. So yeah, this is just sort of interesting. You have to go into it because if we look at the text here, this is many, many pages long. So I cannot read it all, but there's all these different things. I'm just looking at this. Oh, they have there's a section on general science, space, and technology. I find that interesting. So a new budget authority. Okay, so this looks like Senate committees, because there's a Senate committee on, or I forget if it's House or Senate, but it's probably both. But there's like a Congress committee on space, on science, space, and technology. Like that's the name of the committee. Specifically, those three things. So this sort of gives those committees an amount of money to work with beforehand. But yeah, if you want to read this further, you can. It's just a lot of... It's really just a lot of... I mean, it's a budget. It's like an allowance. So it's giving an allowance to each different group. You've got administration of justice. You've got all these different, congressional groups. And so this is telling them what they can work with. And of course, they can spend this money on different things. So, all right, next we've got confirming cabinet appointments. This is the Senate's job, and before the impeachment started, or the impeachment trial in the Senate, a few more cabinet appointments got through because the impeachment trial held that up for about a week. So we've got Pete Buttigieg as Secretary of Transportation on February 3rd. We have Alejandro Mayorkas, or is Mayorka? I think that might be a typo, but I forget. But he's Homeland Security. And then Veterans Affairs, McDonough. So, yeah, just by now, I'd say we have about half of Joe Biden's cabinet confirmed. So that is progress. It's taking a few months, I guess. I haven't looked into if that is normal or not, but obviously it's best, and any administration works best when you have all the proper people in place. So this is just sort of good to happen to make a more effective administration. Best that this occurs as quick as possible. So that's just progress there. What else? Yeah, I guess that's it about that. But yeah, all right. Next. Okay, so now we have the Trump impeachment trial. And this was the shortest impeachment trial of the 4 that have occurred in U.S. history, because so the reason was the Senate at the end of the week held a vote on whether or not they wanted to have witnesses come and testify for the trial, and they voted not to have witnesses testify and just hold the verdict right then and there. And I believe this is because lines have sort of been drawn. People already knew likely which way they were going to vote before they went into the trial. I would say most senators knew which way they would vote beforehand. I don't think witnesses would have very much changed any opinions here. The politicians are increasingly sort of set in stone on different issues. That's just the nature of politics right now. And so the Senate obviously has other things that it wants to do, like pass budgets. There's a COVID relief bill it's trying to get its way through. There's, debates about including a $15 minimum wage in the bill or not. I think it probably won't end up in the final bill. But, important sort of government operation things need to happen. And if further argumentation isn't going to change anyone's opinions, then it is not worth it to continue. So that is why the trial ended so quickly and ended with this vote of 57 guilty to 43 not guilty. And impeachment requires 67, or it requires 2/3, which is right now 67, to convict, to actually be guilty. So even though the majority voted to convict, Trump still got acquitted. So, what this means is that he could potentially run again, because there were, conversations of, after impeaching Trump, to also, after convicting him, to also bar him from holding office again. And that isn't an inherent property of impeachment. That's just this one specific amendment. The 14th Amendment includes in it that those who, incite insurrection or, just rebel against the United States can not hold office again, because, again, lots of things come back to the Reconstruction period here. During the Reconstruction period, a lot of ex-Confederates were trying to get into the Senate and Congress, and the Republican senators did not want that because they were Confederates. Simple as that. But because first Trump would have had to be declared guilty, and then a second vote would have occurred, which would only need a simple majority to pass to bar him from holding office again. However, it required him to be impeached first, because since he was acquitted of inciting insurrection against the United States, that means that the 14th Amendment does not bar him from holding office again, because legally speaking, he did not incite insurrection against the United States. Just from a legal standpoint, again, regardless of what you think of that, he was acquitted, So that's sort of how the legal process is. I mean, there have been many, many questionable trials throughout history, questionable legal processes where you don't necessarily agree with the verdict. But that is sort of, the verdict is how the system operates. The verdict is what the system sort of assumes to be true now going forward. So that is sort of how that works. I mean, clearly, 57 out of 100 senators believe that he did incite insurrection against the United States. And yeah, that's just a very, very heated issue. And it's interesting, even some senators like McConnell voted no for impeachment, but then after doing so came out and made statements against the president, like or the former president, suggesting that he had incited insurrection, which is sort of strange because if he believed that, then he should have voted guilty. So it sort of seemed like again, very political maneuvers here. This is the government, this is politics we're talking about. But compared to other impeachments, let's look at this. So the impeachment vote, how did the impeachment vote come down? So I believe this was the second closest impeachment vote in U.S. history. The closest one, or for a president, obviously, the closest one was Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was acquitted 35 to 19, I believe. Let's see, I'm just trying to do some math there. Yeah, 35 to 19. It would have required 36 votes to convict him. So only one senator decided not to impeach Andrew Johnson and prevented him from getting impeached. That would have caused an interesting situation if Andrew Johnson had been impeached, because there was no vice president at that time, because the 25th Amendment had not been passed yet. So there was no process for appointing a vice president. Vice presidents had to be voted in via election. And so since Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated, Andrew Johnson became president, but then there was no one to fill in the role of vice president. And it's actually pretty interesting. Obviously, that could have caused problems. The next in line, I believe, would have been the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And I think what it came down to was the one dissenting senator didn't like Andrew Johnson, but didn't want the Speaker of the House to become president. So that's interesting. Obviously, that issue is now sort of resolved with the vice president gap, because when the vice presidency is vacant, the president can appoint another one with the consent of the Senate, just like a cabinet pick, which is pretty good because there are many instances throughout U.S. history where the vice presidency has been vacated, and it could have actually, caused a pretty tense situation in the 70s with Nixon, because Nixon ended up resigning, and if you didn't have the 25th Amendment, then, basically, Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, had resigned a year earlier due to some sort of corruption. And so, without the 25th Amendment, that office would have been empty. And so then the presidency, after he resigned, would have fallen to the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House. And that's never happened before, and I imagine if it did happen, it would be it would be pretty chaotic. But anyway, so Johnson was only one vote away from being convicted. And the next was this most recent impeachment trial of 57 to 43. Trump was 10 votes away from being convicted. So there's quite a gap there. But then if you look at the next impeachment trials, you have, say, Clinton was impeached, had one of his articles was 50 votes. Then the last Trump impeachment, there was one vote was 48 to 52 in 48 in favor of impeachment, and then the other article was 47, and then back to Clinton again with 45 to 55 for the other article. So that's a gap of 7 to the third most, with the 50 to 50 impeachment, Article 2 impeachment for Bill Clinton. So this was a fairly, again, it was the second closest impeachment, U.S. impeachment trial in history. So that might have some interesting political ramifications. And let me actually go to the next slide here. So here we have the 7 Republicans who voted to convict Donald Trump. And so you've got, Senator Burr of North Carolina, Senator Cassidy of Louisiana, Senator Collins of Maine, Murkowski of Alaska, Romney of Utah, Sass of Nebraska, and Toomey of Pennsylvania. So already some of these states are more sort of purple states than red states. Like North Carolina was sort of undecided during the presidential election for a while. Pennsylvania, too, is this sort of swing state. But these other states are a bit more Republican. And this is interesting for these senators specifically because it's yet to be seen how this might affect their political careers. I do not know when their terms end. Their terms end anywhere between 2 and 6 years from now. Each of them has a different, is in a different class, right? And it's likely that, well, not likely, but it's possible that they could be primary. And what is likely is that their primary challengers, whether they win or not, will use this against them in the primary. So you'll have another Republican, say, a congressman from that state that is now going to run for senator, might run against one of these people and say, look, they voted to impeach Trump. They're, not a good Republican or whatever. It's a very useful campaign strategy, likely. But alternatively, again, if we look back at these sort of moderate states, some of these states are more moderate, some of them aren't, so it really depends on the state. It might be useful for these candidates to say, I have principles. I am a principled candidate. I voted to impeach Trump because just based on my principles, regardless of partisanship. So it really depends. But it could go either way, and if this negatively affects these 7 politicians, of course that would just further sort of divide the 2 political parties. The 2 political parties, I think they've done, there's, data visualizations, charts you can look at where the parties move apart. There's a ton of debate. Of course, the, Republicans will say the Democrats have moved farther left, and of course the Democrats will say, no, we've stayed the same, the Republicans have moved farther right. Of course, both parties will say that they are the ones that have stayed in the center and the others have moved to the sides, but regardless, they both agree that they're moving apart, right? So this sort of thing is likely to move them further apart, because if these senators get unseated due to this impeachment vote, it could be a very big campaign issue when the midterms roll around, depending on which one of these senators is up for re-election. So that's something to look out for in the future. So then finally, the Senate was able to get back to, I guess, more productive business, because ultimately the impeachment trial was sort of fruitless. Again, he was not convicted. Hasn't really happened in U.S. history. So, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe. I guess it's just important that the process is there. But anyway, the Senate was able to get back to confirming Biden's cabinet picks. So we have Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack on February 24th. We have Secretary of Energy Granholm on February 25th. And we have UN Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, February 25th. So the UN ambassadorship, I probably should have... Wait, give me 1 second. I need to check something here. Okay, yeah, the UN ambassadorship is a cabinet level position, so it requires a Senate confirmation. However, it is not a sort of line of succession thing. And you can tell the difference, well, kind of. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes, but if they're not a secretary or the attorney general, then they are definitely not within the sort of official cabinet. Yeah. So, okay, so if they're not a secretary or the attorney general, because the attorney general is special, they get a different name, they're either something like the administrator of, or the director of, or, ambassador to, something else like that. So you have a ton of these different positions. White House Chief of Staff as well, that sort of thing. Those are cabinet level positions, but only the secretaries of blank department get to be in the line of succession. Of course, they're like 5th through 20th or something, so it's very unlikely that they would ever become president, but it just sort of shows you the main cabinet versus like the more external figures. But yeah, UN ambassador, I believe at one point, let me check, I think it might be George H.W. Bush had been a UN ambassador. I might be wrong about that. I know he's director of the CIA at one point. But yeah, so director of the CIA, I believe. Yeah, 11th director of the CIA. But before that, he was the United States ambassador to the United Nations. So this is still a very important role, even though it is not an official cabinet position. It's interesting. I always just thought of the cabinet as the secretaries and the vice president of each sort of executive department. But these cabinet level positions are also important to just think about and look at every once in a while. So yeah. All right, so next we get to the executive branch with President Biden. He signed fewer executive orders this month than he did last month. He signed a lot of executive orders last month, if you remember. Let me just pull up sort of the list here. So this month, Biden signed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 executive orders, which is still quite high, even though that is less than last month. But I'll admit that is still quite high for a president. Actually, let me get that. I did what was it? Comparison. I am tired. It is Friday. I couldn't think of the word comparison for some reason. But let me pull this up for a second. List of executive orders or actions. What I'm doing here is I'm going to compare for you guys how far into other presidents' presidencies it took to get to the total number of executive orders Biden is at now, which is 34 total executive orders. So for President Trump, it took until May 4th, 2017 to get to 34 executive orders, and for Obama, it took until December 9th, 2009 to get to 34 executive orders, and then right now it's the end of February. It's February 26th. So if we're going to compare that, at this point in the Trump administration, he had only signed 13 executive orders, and at this point in the Obama administration, he had only signed 16 executive orders. So many more executive orders than is usual for a president, and that is, somewhat, well, it's concerning, I guess you could say, as a permanent trend, but so far I don't think it's gone on long enough to really make a big deal about it. But the sort of problem I can see this causing is that executive orders can be reversed as easily as they are created. They can simply be reversed by the next president. That is what we are seeing happen with all of Trump's executive orders. Much of Biden's sort of executive actions this month and last month have been removing and undoing, like literally, like not simply putting out new policies that effectively undo, like executive orders with literal titles of just revoking previous executive orders. Which, if they were bad executive orders, that is fine. But the problem with this is that if you rely too heavily on executive orders, it means that your progress can essentially be wiped away by the next administration. That is essentially what Trump is facing right now. And if Biden, eventually there's going to be another Republican president, whether that be in 4 years, 8 years, or 12 years, right? At some point, usually it swings back, right? And at that point, when that Republican president comes into office, there's not going to be anything to stop them from just reversing Biden policies. So ideally, it would be Congress that does this. In the Constitution, Congress was meant to be the strongest branch of the government. But unfortunately, it seems that it's not doing as much these days. It is sort of, they are really getting entangled in fighting with each other, the different Congress people and senators. So that's, I guess, an issue for Congress to sort out. Kind of for the voters to sort out too, to vote for people that aren't going to get in fights with each other, which is sort of difficult. Again, just the parties have continued to move away from each other. But the focus really should be, to affect lasting change, you have to go through Congress, I guess is what I'm saying. So, executive orders, while they're executive orders, I feel, are good for temporary action. But as soon as the next person comes along, it's just easily reversed. So, but anyway, let's get into these, because these can still affect policy for at least the next 4 years. So we've got some immigration-related executive orders. Those were the first few ones. We have creating a comprehensive regional framework to address the causes of migration, to manage migration throughout North and Central America, and to provide safe and orderly processing of asylum seekers at the United States border. We have the establishment of interagency task force on the reunification of families, and we have restoring faith in our legal immigration systems and strengthening integration and inclusion efforts for new Americans. So, yeah, these are just immigration reform that I've highlighted is a very big issue. That was one of the campaign issues. Something that was the middle one in particular here was a big campaign issue of the reunification of immigrant families at the U.S. border, was what Biden wanted to reverse sort of Trump administration policies, and really long-standing U.S. policy. that needed to be changed, so that is what he's doing here. But yeah, just sort of changing immigration laws. So next we have February 4th, we have rebuilding and enhancing programs to resettle refugees and planning for the impact of climate change on migration. This is an interesting one. This one talks about, I find this interesting just in sort of human demographics. It's a ridiculous proportion of people live near the coastlines, which is just fascinating. And it makes sense. The ocean and the rivers of the planet provide for proper transportation, for greatly increased transportation. It's much easier to transport things from coasts, right? And the result of that means better trade, wealthier port cities than inland cities, and so people tend to live near the coasts. But the unfortunate result of that with respect to climate change is that when sea levels rise and when extreme weather events that primarily affect the coasts become more common, the results will be so-called climate refugees, which is something we haven't really seen much of yet, but is something that could occur in the future, which would be pretty concerning. So it's good for the US and just countries around the world to sort of prepare for that possibility. Ideally, it wouldn't have to happen. Ideally, we could sort of solve the issue and just resolve things. But just in case, just checking for any chat here. If anyone's in the chat, feel free to ask any questions. But it's just a good idea to be sort of proactive and consider things before they actually occur. That's I guess something good here, because the government tends to be reactive, because just in a democracy or a constitutional republic, the people tend to be reactive, and so that reflects into their politicians. You know, you see a news story, you get mad about it, and you want your politicians to address that. But while that's important, it is also a good idea to be proactive at the same time. I think these are not mutually exclusive things. And while a politician should respond to the concerns of their constituency, which will tend to be more reactive, it's a good idea for them in the background to also do more proactive things. So that's sort of what this is. So next we have February 11th, and this is blocking property with respect to the situation in Burma. So I gave this a different color code. I gave this a cyan color, a bright cyan, because this is like an international situation, which I thought was sort of different from everything else, all the other groups I had. So in Burma, or I'm pretty sure it's called Myanmar now. I don't know why the name Burma is used. I'm not sure if they're interchangeable or if one is preferred, but so I'm just going to say Burma for the sake of what this executive order said. But in Burma, there was recently a military coup. There was sort of this uprising that replaced their government. I'm not too well read up on that, but this executive order essentially says anyone who is in the Burmese military or involved with the coup or is related to anyone involved with the coup, you know, anyone that is peripherally related to this situation, shall have their accounts in America, if there are any, their assets frozen for the sake of supporting, or, you know, supporting not the coup. I don't know how to phrase that better. For not supporting the coup, because they're trying to... This coup was undemocratic, so the U.S. opposes it, and as a result, you know, this blocking of property is in an effort, hopefully, to undermine these undemocratic forces and allow the proper government to prevail in Burma. So that's what this is. So that's pretty interesting. Next, we have February 14th. We have establishment of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. So this is pretty interesting. This is a sort of government collaboration with more local and municipal leaders to help provide resources to their communities. And I mean, with the pandemic and in response to just any other sort of poverty concerns that a community has. And I think this is a great idea. It's been done before. Within this executive order, they reference a lot of like Bush and Obama executive orders and sort of expand upon those. And I think this is a great idea just because regional groups know how to help people in their own community best. There are issues where, with not all, but some federal programs can end up getting bogged down or become inefficient because they cannot properly respond to the needs of all the different communities across America. But partnering with these charitable organizations within these communities is going to improve the federal government's ability to assist Americans in those communities, which is a great thing during this pandemic. More efficient government aid is just a great idea because it means not as much money has to be spent in order to actually positively affect people the most. So yeah, that's that. So next we have Executive Order on the revocation of Executive Order 13801. Executive Order 13801 was an executive order called like the National, well no, it was about apprenticeships. I forget the actual official title of it. Actually, I should probably just pull that up right now. Let me just grab the old executive order quickly, just the title. Now, I believe that this comes with respect to a new bill that is working its way through Congress right now. So, yes, it was expanding apprenticeships in America. That's the executive order that was revoked. I think this comes ahead of, there's a bill going through Congress right now. It passed the House. It's H.R. 447, or the National Apprenticeships Act. So Congress wants to do something about apprenticeships specifically, and in anticipation of that, I guess, Biden is revoking this Trump executive order just because this new law is going to handle apprenticeships in a different way. Once that law gets passed, if that law gets passed, I will read it here. But until then, I have not really delved into that research as much. The Trump executive order, at least, was trying to encourage sort of apprenticeship and vocational education programs rather than just the traditional, bachelor's degree, 4-year college. And I think Biden's agenda and the Congress's agenda, I think everyone sort of has the same idea here. They want to encourage and help other paths to getting a good career flourish, but they're just doing it in different ways. So the revocation of this executive order, again, this is important to note. A lot of this, sometimes when Biden revokes a Trump executive order, it's not even because he's flat out against it. It's because he wants to do it slightly differently in a way that he believes to be more effective. So yeah, it might look like there's a lot of revocation going on, and there is, but it isn't, I would say, as much of a reversal as it feels like. But yeah, so this just comes in response to, of course, this whole sort of push for apprenticeships comes in response to the skyrocketing costs of college in America. I believe over the course of the last 30 years, it's something like the amount of college students has increased by a crazy factor, and so has the price of college. People debate why that is, but it's beginning to cause some problems, especially since it's kind of hard to get by in modern America with only a high school degree. A college degree is often required for most jobs. Whereas in the past it was sort of possible for people to find work with only a high school education. So it's difficult in this sort of situation where college is very expensive, but then it's also kind of necessary for most people. Although I will say, it really depends on which college, because the most famous colleges are obviously going to be the most expensive, but there are a lot of sort of lesser known and even just community colleges that are less expensive, and of course apprenticeships. There are other options. This is sort of vocational training in a specific career with a specific job type. It's pretty interesting to look into. Probably not for me, because I am more going into science and economics, but for other career choices, it's interesting to look at alternatives that might be less expensive and might be more sort of fruitful and worth the price more, I guess. And so that is what these sort of executive orders are encouraging. That is what the original Trump executive order was encouraging. Hopefully that National Apprenticeships Act actually does get passed, because otherwise this executive order, the Trump executive order, has been revoked. So if the new law doesn't get through, then that would sort of stop the progress in the creation of this alternate pathway. Of course, if the law stalls for too long, then Biden could make his own executive order. I would hope he would do that. I think that would be the right thing to do, because apprenticeships programs and finding alternatives to college, making sure that college isn't the only option for people, is definitely important. Of course, with the student loans, student debt crisis that's occurring, and that was another campaign issue for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, was the student debt crisis. I believe during the vice presidential debates, Kamala Harris suggested that she wanted to give everyone with student loan debt like a $10,000 debt forgiveness. I'm not sure that's really going to happen. I don't think that campaign promise is going to be fulfilled. However, making sure to support apprenticeships and alternative pathways would help alleviate the student debt crisis, because you wouldn't have as many people, taking out student loans to go into college. You'd have a sort of diversion. You'd have people in alternate pathways that are less expensive, and people don't take out debt as often in this sort of apprenticeship type situation. So I think this executive order probably should have come after the passage of the National Apprenticeships Act. But of course, one of the first Trump executive orders was reducing the economic burden of Obamacare pending repeal. And then of course, Obamacare was never fully repealed, although parts of it were. So I guess this is sort of commonplace, but we'll see how that new law comes out. I'm actually eager to sort of see what that new law entails, because this is an interesting issue I've read up on a few times before. All right, next we've got Executive Order on America's Supply Chain and Executive Order on the Revocation of Certain Presidential Actions. So these are more recent executive orders. I haven't had the chance to actually read them yet, unfortunately, so I do not know about them as in depth. But let me just pull the two of them up right now. So, okay. So the executive order on America's supply chains is about security. There seems to be a lot of cybersecurity and homeland security type situations in here. And that's really important because modern society is incredibly dependent on supply chains. And you might not really know what a supply chain is, but it's essentially the way that goods and services get from producer to consumer. We rely, for instance, on trucking to get food to supermarkets across the country. Food is heavily created in one part of the country and then practically nowhere else. And a few different parts of the country are like very heavily dedicated to producing agriculture, and the rest of the country not as much. So, like all the nation's major cities, for instance, require heavy supply chains because the cities themselves don't actually produce much. The cities mostly produce services at this point. Cities used to have factories in them. I'm not sure how much there's industry in cities today. Manufacturing has sort of been on the decline. But the point is that in terms of a security situation, any sort of foreign entity or any foreign or domestic terror organization would be able to do a lot of damage if they targeted the supply chain. Because, again, if we look at these cities, for instance, if somehow all of America's roads were closed or all of its trucks were out of commission, it would only take a few days before people started to starve to death in all the nation's major cities, which would be an utter catastrophe, and that would lead to chaos, famine. It would not be a pretty situation. So it's a very, very good idea to make sure that our supply chains are secure, especially with respect to cyber attacks, because we are increasingly reliant on the internet and digital services. I read this really interesting book called 1 Second After. It was actually recommended to me by Sebastian. 128 seconds. I would be interested to know how many people watch this channel that don't actually watch my main channel. But, Sebastian's my co-host over on Gravity Max. But anyway, this book details the events of America after an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, goes off that fries the electronics across the entire country. And it is brutal what happens in that book. It is very devastating. Everything just totally shuts down. Every car made after 1980 breaks down and is just unusable permanently because they have computerized equipment within them. So, again, I'm just saying, we cannot underestimate how much we rely on our supply chains. And it is great that we're seeing an executive order responding to that. So then this next executive order on revocation of certain presidential actions, let's take a look at that. So it just looks like a ton of revocations, as it says. As the title suggests, you've got Executive Order 13772, Core Principles for Regulating the United States Financial System. So, I guess Biden and Trump would very much differ on their principles for regulating the U.S. financial system. Then you've got reducing poverty in America by promoting opportunity and economic mobility. That is Executive Order 13828. And also just keep in mind, every executive order always has a title that every law and just anything in government has a title that sounds better than what the actual policy does. So you may be thinking, oh, why is Biden revoking something that is meant to reduce poverty in America by promoting opportunity and economic mobility? And the answer is that it's more complicated than simply that. I mean, the Patriot Act was called the Patriot Act. And we all know security state type stuff. So it's just, Then you've got memorandums. You've got delegation of certain authority under the Federal Service Labor Management Relations. We've got regulatory relief to support economic recovery. Yeah, just a ton of revocations. So what I find interesting here, oh wow, even Executive Order 13979 of January 18th, 2021, which was right just 2 days before Biden took office, is revoked. Yeah, so what I find interesting is that I've been reading, all of Biden's executive orders, and as of yet, as of what I've read, I haven't seen him revoke any executive orders or presidential actions that were not Trump actions. And I don't know why that is. He hasn't, it makes sense that he wouldn't repeal anything Obama did, kind of, because he was part of the Obama administration. But of course, things have changed since, 2009, 2010. So I would imagine, something might be out of date. But then even, nothing repealed of George Bush or anything. I don't know, maybe that's normal, and, I haven't been paying this close attention. I didn't pay this close attention back in 2017 to see, say, Trump revoking a ton of Obama executive orders. If that occurred, I do not know. But maybe it's just standard fare that the next president always sort of revokes solely the actions of their predecessor. But I don't know, I find it kind of weird because the February 14th one, the one about the faith-based, community partnerships, referenced a lot of George Bush's actions and expanded upon those. I don't know. I just find it weird. I guess it really just does come down to the fact that Donald Trump was a very, very different kind of president, and as a result, Biden very much disagrees with Trump. It seems like every former president kind of disagrees with Trump, whereas collectively they're much more in consensus. Like, I guess what I mean by that is, you've got, Biden, Obama, and Bush are probably more in line in action than even Bush and Trump, even though they're part of the same party, which is just strange, but there has been a lot of this sort of divide in the Republican Party. As you've seen with the impeachment trial, 7 Republicans voted to impeach the former president, which is, I guess, that's unprecedented, because Andrew Johnson was essentially a Democrat, and Congress was full of Republicans. So he did not have fellow Democrats voting to impeach him. Same thing with Clinton and Trump the first time. Only one of his articles, he got 1 vote from Romney, which was a member of his same party, to Convict. But yeah, so this sort of suggests this kind of breakdown within the Republican Party. I don't know how that's going to be reconciled in the future, but we'll see. So then we have some Biden memoranda. We have maximizing assistance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and we have revitalizing America's foreign policy and national security workforce, institutions, and partnerships. And then finally, advancing the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex persons around the world. So memoranda, again, and proclamations are slightly different than executive orders. I don't read through them, because that would be a lot. I already have a lot on my plate with the executive orders, but you can look into these more. It's just sort of in line with Biden policy in general. I'm not sure the specifics are that important here. I mean, you get the titles. If you're interested in any of these, feel free to read them. You know what I think I'm going to do? I think I want to provide in my channel description the main sources I use, but the whitehouse.gov actually has basically a page called Presidential Actions. That's where I look to see all the executive orders, but they also put up proclamations and memoranda and notices. It's very interesting. If you want to read all of these, I would highly recommend. It's whitehouse.gov/briefing-room/presidential-actions. So you can check that out if you want. And I'll put that link somewhere eventually. So then we've got proclamations. We have adjusting imports of aluminum into the United States. This is an interesting one because I believe this is sort of reversing the Trump tariffs that Trump put on China. Trump put, I think it was like 20% a tariff on steel and aluminum from China to sort of encourage domestic production of those products, as well as sort of, I think they've referred to it as a trade war with China that's sort of going on right now, but it was also an effort to counter China. But yeah, that's being reversed. Biden, I guess, is more in favor of like free trade. It's interesting. You've got a lot of, I would say the Democrats, like half of the Republicans, and then even like third-party people, like the Libertarians, tend to be in favor of less tariffs and more free trade. Tariffs, protectionism tend not to be as popular in politics, so that's to be expected. So then we have proclamation of American Heart Month, proclamation of National Black History Month, and proclamation of National Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. So of course it's February, and so that's National Black History Month every year. But the other two sort of proclamations, I suppose, are just to raise awareness of these other issues as well during the month of February. I think the president tends to do that for each month, give each month like a different thing. But Black History Month, of course, is very well established. The other two, I think, are newer. But yeah, so then we have remembering the 500,000 Americans lost to COVID-19. Yeah, February 22nd, that was the day that America surpassed 500,000 deaths, 500,000. I'm not sure. I think that might be more than the... It's in the ballpark of the Spanish flu. Of course, there were less Americans at that time, like just the total population, but that's sort of crazy that this is reaching the same magnitude as the Spanish flu, which was pretty horrible. So next we have notice on the continuation of the national emergency concerning the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. So yeah. We are still in a state of national emergency. There you go. Notice on the continuation of the national emergency with respect to Cuba and of the emergency authority relating to the regulation of the anchorage and movement of vessels. So I am not aware of this Cuba situation. I'll have to look into that more. But yeah, that's actually pretty concerning. You know, I'm here in Florida, so Cuba is only a couple hundred miles away. I'm of course not in Key West, right? But if I were in Key West, I think Key West is only about 90 miles from Cuba. So we're really close to Cuba. Scary, but imagine it, yeah. It's just sort of funny because, I mean, it's not funny, but during the Cold War, you know, with Cuba being a communist nation, Florida was very much on edge because of that. And it's just interesting to be in this area, to be so physically close to Cuba, because I used to live in Connecticut, and that is very far away from Cuba, very distant. it's not Cuba specifically, but like people in Hawaii there was that false like missile warning, because they're pretty close, not pretty close, I mean, it's a very big ocean, but they're close enough to North Korea to be concerned. I think people on the West Coast, even just like California, Washington, and Oregon, are concerned about North Korea. But New England is a pretty protected area, it seems, in terms of just geographically in the United States. Probably farthest away from any sort of hostile agents, but Florida juts out into the Caribbean more. So, of course, you have Cuba, which is dicey, and yeah, I just never thought about that before. I just find that interesting personally. So then we have a proclamation on revoking Proclamation 10,014. I'm just going to take a wild guess and assume that Proclamation 10,014 is one that President Trump signed. Yes, April 22nd, 2020. So that is suspension of entry of immigrants who present a risk to the United States labor market during the economic recovery following the 2019 novel coronavirus outbreak. So I don't know specifically what that executive order was, or that proclamation was. But Biden has a policy that was a while ago that was sort of restricting travel from Europe and South Africa, of course, because you've got the UK variant and the South Africa variant of the coronavirus that were more concerning, so we're sort of restricting travel from those areas. But this proclamation sounds more like it's a economic thing rather than a actual sort of pandemic health concern thing. Just basically saying, this is sort of the usual thing, is that since so many people are out of work during the pandemic, reducing immigration is necessary. Not my argument here, not my argument. I'm saying what this proclamation is likely saying. Since so many people are out of work from the pandemic, we should suspend immigration from certain areas because we don't need more of a labor force because there's a job shortage. I think that's probably what that proclamation was saying. Of course, you can read it. I'm sorry, I'm just sort of taking shots in the dark here. But, that would sort of fall in line with typical sort of Trump policy, was protecting American jobs by restricting immigration. Again, regardless of what you think, if that's effective or not, that's the stated reason that Trump and his supporters sort of want to restrict immigration. And then, we can get into, I don't want to get into the political debate here. I don't like to do that. But that's what I imagine that proclamation was. And of course, Biden obviously takes the other side of that issue. So naturally, he would revoke that proclamation. All right, so finally we get to the judicial branch. So the judicial branch gave 4 different opinions this month and heard 4 different cases, although it was one of those things where one of the cases was like 2 in 1. So, yeah. But anyway, so we've got Federal Republic of Germany versus Philip, and we have, they're sort of related, Republic of Hungary versus Simon, these two together. These were essentially Holocaust survivors suing their home nations over damages incurred. Germany specifically, there's this like art collection that this person was coerced into selling to Germany as the government was becoming more hostile, and they were suing to get it back. And so the issue here was about international law and the United States' place in it. What's interesting about the Supreme Court is that they'll often make a decision just based on the decisions are heavily scrutinized, and it's like about very practical application of the law. So they sided with Germany here, which is like, you may not, that's kind of dicey, but the reason was because the petitioners were suing under this sort of International Relations Act, where it's like when a foreign agent commits, war crimes or violates international law, that they can be sued. And they were arguing that this, like, coercion was an act of genocide. But the Supreme Court said, like, even if it was, the taking of a nation's own, like, this is what they said, it's the taking of their own nationals' property, their own citizens' property, does not interfere with international relations, and therefore it is not under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Supreme Court. That's sort of what it was about. So the petitioners have to essentially get the matter sorted in their home countries of Germany and Hungary, because of course this second one is essentially the same thing. So the Supreme Court decided, it was based on, this one law, the sort of international interference law or whatever. That's not the official title, but you can go check out those videos if you want to learn more. So then we had the Salinas versus Railroad Retirement Board. This was a railroad worker named Salinas who applied for retirement as well as disability benefits a couple times, and he didn't get accepted them. So then when he finally got it many years later, he sort of sued for compensation for the years that he didn't get this benefit. So the Supreme Court sided with him in a 5-4 decision. So a kind of split decision here, which is fascinating. Most of the time I feel it's unanimous, the decisions, but I haven't seen that many. I've only seen like 7 that I've looked into so far. So yeah, but that's what happened here. Yeah. So finally we have Brownback versus King. I haven't had the chance to read this one yet. However, this was a case about, it was kind of crazy actually. My sort of briefly looking into it was, there were federal, FBI agents that were undercover, and they suspected this person, King, of, like, I don't know, being a suspicious person. So then they arrested him, but he resisted arrest because he thought he was getting mugged because they were undercover agents. But then the agents claimed that they declared themselves as police, so that this person was resisting arrest. It's a muddy situation. The Supreme Court sided with Brownback here, and it got bounced back and forth a few times. It was the Western District Court of Michigan favored Brownback, and so then King appealed, and the Sixth Circuit Court, which is like a couple states including Michigan, overruled that and said, no, this is a violation of King's Fourth Amendment's rights because this was unreasonable search and seizure. I mean, I was looking into it, and one of the things the Sixth Circuit said occurred was that these people, the federal agents, took his wallet, which, because they claimed, they believed that, he had a weapon or something concealed. It's kind of I can understand how this person might feel like they're being mugged, but, so then the Supreme Court, so King appealed the decision of the district court and won in the circuit court, but then Brownback appealed the decision of the circuit court and won in the Supreme Court. So that is what occurred here. So, yeah, an interesting case. I'm going to read about it more. I'm going to put up those videos. I have 3 videos to make right now. It's this one, and then those last 2 executive orders. Yeah. These things are very recent. It's from like Wednesday and Thursday, so I have not had time. But yeah, so then finally we get to cases heard. Here we also have another new color-coded thing, the brown color. I've decided to make that sort of interstate disputes. So we've got Florida versus Georgia, which is about water rights in the, I think it's the Chattanooga River. It was some river that starts in Georgia and then passes through Florida as it goes to the coast. And this is sort of the classic Supreme Court case, the sort of interstate disputes. Originally, this is what the Supreme Court primarily dealt with, rather than sort of disputes between different citizens or that sort of thing, or reviewing laws, determining the constitutionality of laws. The Supreme Court didn't used to do that. Very early on, it adopted that, I think as early as 1804. It was Marbury versus Madison, where, you know, James Madison, he wasn't president yet at this point, but I forget what he did, but they were like, this is unconstitutional, you have to do this instead. And so the Supreme Court, you know, very quickly, I mean, the Constitution was ratified in like 1788. So this very quickly diverged from its original intent, which is fine, I guess. I mean, it's not like some of the changes that occur in government, people will complain about and say, you know, this goes against the, you know, meaning this goes against the Constitution. But this happened in 1804. This was one of the earliest shifts that occurred. I mean, it occurred under Jefferson's presidency, so it's like, this was still constitutional time period, I feel. This was still a formative thing. But anyway, my point is, the interstate dispute thing is like the classic, a water rights dispute. Love it. I don't know. I mean, yeah, so this is just about water usage in a river. Water rights are really interesting, actually. I'm not too into them, but when I think about it, it's just fascinating. It gets worse when it's disputes between countries, let me tell you. But it's just Georgia and Florida, and then like some federal agency as well. Just the usage of water. Because the thing is, a river is not an infinite water source, obviously. A river produces a finite amount of water per second or per year, whichever unit of time you want to use. And so when there's a river that passes through multiple states or multiple towns or just multiple entities, agreements have to be made on how to use the river. For instance, if a downstream, you know, group wants to use the river for drinking water, then obviously the upstream group cannot use the river to dispose of waste. That would be a very big problem. But also, there are debates about how much water they're allowed to remove from the river. So Georgia is allotted a certain amount of water that they are allowed to use from the river, you know, a certain amount of gallons per year. And and then Florida gets the same. I think also Alabama gets some, because this river goes along the border there. So this is like panhandle, Florida panhandle territory. So yeah, just an interesting Supreme Court case. And of course, these cases have not been decided yet, and I only read a case once it has been decided. So there will be more to come about these cases once they actually get decided. So let's see. This next one is about immigration. Yeah, okay. I remember this one. So this one is like, I think, an immigrant from China seeking asylum in the United States, seeking protection under the Convention Against Torture. So that's sort of what's being debated here. I don't know specifically what happened with the immigration. You can look into that if you want, but, you know, some sort of misstep in the process occurred that disparaged this individual, so he's like, you know, he wants justice, right? So yeah, that's just interesting. Of course, yeah, let's see. Question. Can a court, and this is from oyez.org, can a court of appeals presume that an immigrant's testimony is credible and true if an immigration judge or the Board of Immigration Appeals did not specifically find that he was not credible? It's very interesting. A lot of legal stuff. Again, I just find so many different areas of study interesting, but there's only so much you can get into, right? But the legal field I find so interesting because there's a lot of like edge questions. There's a lot of specific questions. It's not usually about general principles. It's usually about very specific, precise things. A case that involves, say, 100 different aspects can be decided over just one aspect. The one that just seems the easiest to argue in favor of, depending on what side you're on. So it's just fascinating. A lot of Supreme Court cases are like sort of thrown out based on like a specific part of the process rather than general principles. That is what we saw earlier with the, you know, Federal Republic of Germany versus, or sorry, it was, I forgot the official name. It was, yeah, Federal Republic of Germany versus Philip, and the Republic of Hungary versus Simon. Those two cases, like, I imagine the Supreme Court justices obviously have enough empathy that they would like to side with literal Holocaust victims, but they are sort of, you know, they have to make a decision based on law and just very strict definitions of things so that no other like group can sort of abuse this Supreme Court case, because Supreme Court cases establish precedent. So that's what occurs here. So again, interesting. So then we have Lange versus California. This is sort of similar to the Brownback versus King case. This is another sort of like the police or law enforcement did something. Yeah, let me get the link to the oyez.org. Very good source. Again, a Fourth Amendment issue. We have the question here from Oyez is, does the exigent circumstances exception to the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement apply when police are pursuing a subject whom they believe committed a misdemeanor? This is interesting. The Fourth Amendment obviously gives you protection against search and seizure, you know, unreasonable, unwarranted search and seizure unless there is probable cause. So this is a case about whether or not there was probable cause in the situation, which was like, you know, this guy Lange, I don't know how to pronounce that name. I assume it's Lange. He was like in his car, and then the police thought he was suspicious. They were going to do a traffic stop. All this sort of thing. All this messy kind of stuff. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. We'll see how all these different cases get decided. But yeah, that's it. In conclusion, the government has done stuff this month. That is that is the conclusion. I'm interested to see what will happen next month. I think in March is when Biden will give his budget proposal. I believe that is when that happens, that the president gives their budget proposal in March, and that's for like the next fiscal year. I'll be interested to see that. Also, hopefully this month we'll see the COVID relief bill that's been working its way through. Hopefully we'll see that pass. But yeah, I expect budget issues are going to be very important in the near future, just because like there's a lot of expenditure going on with the COVID pandemic. Hopefully the pandemic, or at least the sort of economic restrictions that are in place, can be lifted soon, because it's kind of an untenable situation to keep using all this money. I think the current COVID relief bill calls for like $1.9 trillion, which is a lot of money. But it's like, it's necessary because people can't work. That's the basic problem here. It's, you don't want to spend money because it's best when the government isn't spending a crazy amount of money, but you don't want people to suffer because they're out of work, but you don't want to send people back to work because that could worsen the pandemic. So it's like this triangle of bad decisions where whatever decision you make, some point of the triangle will end up left out. That's what the government has to balance at this point, and we'll see how they do that in March, I assume. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you guys all for watching. I'm pretty tired today. Maybe you could hear that in my voice. I don't mean to sound bored. A lot of this I'm interested in. I'm just pretty tired right now. So I'll see you all on the Gravity live stream, 48 hours from now, Sunday, at the same time as this live stream, 5 p.m. We're going to talk about, what are we going to talk about? Oh, we're going to talk about aliens, so it'll be interesting. You guys should like that. So, also, if you're here somehow, just from YouTube in general, rather than from Gravity, kudos to you. Very interesting. And I would highly recommend that you check out Gravity as well. That's my main channel, where I talk all about science and stuff with my co-host Sebastian. Yeah, so if you're interested in science, go check that out. But of course, that's it for GovernMax this month. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.